Good morning. It's Saturday, March 7th, 2026, and this is your daily intelligence briefing. We've got a packed agenda, so let's dive right in. All right, here's our operational roadmap. We're going to kick things off with the big story, India's energy security under pressure. Then we'll jump into macro, politics, and governance, followed by corporate and business intelligence. We'll also touch on an editorial about rights for women farmers and wrap it all up with the closing market snapshot. Okay, let's get into our lead story. India's energy security is really being put to the test. We're talking about a situation where energy, geopolitics, and national sovereignty are all colliding. And a recent U.S. policy move on Russian oil has really put India in a tough position, both economically and politically. So what's at the heart of this? Well, the U.S. Treasury gave India a temporary 30-day waiver to bring in Russian oil. Now, you might think, okay, that sounds helpful, especially with all the conflict in West Asia and oil prices going up. But here's the kicker. The way it was framed, it made it sound like India, a sovereign nation, needed America's permission to make its own energy decisions. And you can bet that did not go over well. It sparked a major political backlash almost immediately. And to really understand the pressure here, you have to look at the reserves. India is operating on a razor-thin margin. We're hearing from government sources that the country has only about 25 days of crude oil, petrol, and diesel stored away. And it's the same story for LPG, cooking gas. That's not a lot of wiggle room. This whole situation is unfolding at a really interesting time because India's reliance on Russian crude was already on a downward trend. In January, for instance, imports dropped to just under $2 billion, $1.98 billion to be exact. And get this, that's the lowest we've seen in 44 months. And this chart really paints the picture, doesn't it? Look at that drop. Russia's share of India's oil imports went from a third of the total, 33%, back in May 2025, and just plummeted to under 20% by this January. So yeah, this U.S. waiver is landing right in the middle of a massive, pre-existing shift in that trade relationship. The economic stakes here are just massive. You better remember, over half of India's oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz. So when you have instability, the risk shoots up. Analysts at JM Financial are sounding the alarm. If Brent crude goes above $90 a barrel, we could see the current account deficit blow out to 1.4% of GDP, and the rupee could weaken all the way to 95 against the dollar. That's a huge deal. And of course, this all feeds right back into the political firestorm. Opposition leaders jumped all over the language of that U.S. waiver. Their argument? It was a public blow to India's strategic independence. The reaction was swift, and it was strong. They weren't mincing words, calling it troubling, and some went even further, calling it a humiliation. All right, moving on to Section 2, Macro, Politics, and Governance. We've got 4 updates that really show how these big global pressures are making waves right here at home. First up, that energy crunch we were just talking about, it's hitting everyday travelers hard. Airfares from West Asia back to India have just gone through the roof. I mean, look at this. Dubai to Mumbai on Fly Dubai is hitting 1.5 lakh rupees. It's gotten so bad that Kerala's chief minister has had to ask the prime minister to step in. Next, let's look at the region, because a huge political upset is brewing in Nepal. Early election results are showing a party that's only 4 years old, the Rashtriya Swatantra Party, with a massive lead in 110 constituencies. The old guard parties are just left in the dust. And think about this. If this holds, it would be Nepal's first majority government in nearly 3 decades, a real game changer. Back here in India, we're seeing a big push to regulate social media for kids. 2 major states are leading the charge. You have Karnataka looking at a ban for anyone under 16, and then Andhra Pradesh is planning to ban it for kids under 13 within 90 days. It's interesting. This is a lot like what Australia just did. But the big question here is enforcement and whether these state-level rules will clash with the center's own data privacy laws. And finally, for this section, the national political scene is feeling pretty shaky right now. For starters, the Lok Sabha is going to debate a motion to remove the speaker on Monday. Both the Congress and BJP have issued whips, which tells you things are serious. On top of that, there's a lot of unease in Bihar's JDU. And, in a totally different but significant development, we've seen the first known instance of citizenship being granted under the CAA to a former detainee in Assam. Okay, let's shift gears to Section 3, Corporate and Business Intelligence. We're going to look at some big moves in finance, strategy, and industry. First up, let's talk about a number that will make your head spin, 18,000 crore rupees. That's the potential value of the employee stock option pool at PhonePe as it gears up for its IPO. We're talking about $2 billion US dollars, and you can be sure that investors are asking a lot of questions about it. Next, let's talk strategy. Uber is getting into India's huge intercity bus market, but they're doing it in a really smart way. Instead of buying buses and building a network from scratch, which would cost a fortune, they're going asset light. They've partnered with Ixigo's Abibus. Boom. Just like that, they have access to 3,000 routes in a market worth an estimated $13 billion. Pretty clever. Now, with all this talk of market stress and volatility, you might think companies are hitting the brakes. But that's not the whole story. We're still seeing major industrial expansion. For example, Airbus just opened a massive new tech center near Bangalore that could hold up to 5,000 employees. And Aditya Birla Global Trading is jumping back into the huge Chinese iron ore market. These are moves that signal some serious long-term confidence. Moving on to our fourth section, the Editorial Digest. Today, we're highlighting a really important piece on the rights of women farmers here in India. The essay is called Rights, Justice, Action for India's Women Farmers, and it's penned by Dr. Soumya Swaminathan and Elizabeth Four. The timing here is really key. It was published right before International Women's Day, and this year also happens to be the International Year of the Women Farmer. So what's their core argument? It's pretty straightforward. Agriculture in India is increasingly a woman's job, but the policies just haven't caught up with that reality. They lay out 4 big priorities to fix this. First, make women farmers visible in the eyes of the law and in our data. Second, give them stronger rights to land. Third, connect our food systems more directly to nutrition. And finally, give them better access to technology that can save them time and labor. And that brings us to our final section, the closing market snapshot. Let's see how all this week's action played out in the numbers. All right, looking at the board, you can just feel the volatility. The BSE Sensex closed at 78,918, the NSE Nifty 50 at 24,450. The rupee ended the day at 91.74 to the US dollar, and Brent crude, well, it settled at $87.56 a barrel. But those closing numbers don't tell the whole story, do they? The context is what really matters. Indian stocks just had their worst week in over a year, down nearly 3%. The rupee actually hit a record low on March 4th. But for me, the most telling indicator is the VIX, the volatility index. You know, they call it the fear index for a reason. It absolutely jumped from around 13 up to nearly 20. That's a massive spike in anxiety across the market, and it perfectly reflects all the uncertainty we've been talking about today. And that concludes our briefing.